Okay, got it now.
So, one of the remaining items in the cap that needed answers and that we've struggled with for a while was how to do cross resource or cross namespace resource sharing. And
Sid, can I interrupt you for 1 second? Your microphone is especially bad today. Are you using a different microphone?
give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Thanks for mentioning it. All right, give me 1 second.
Hello, is that better?
It's better, but you're quiet now.
Oh, let me see. Any better now?
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
perfect.
Okay. Okay. So I got a chance to attend SIG's bi-weekly meeting today or yesterday to talk about cross namespace resource sharing. So one of the remaining items in our KEP and in our something in our way of getting to alpha has been this a good mechanism to share resources across namespaces. There was never a very clean approach to do this, and it makes sense that even though we've had a lot of different people, some of the most capable people in the community come and contribute in this group, it's been difficult to find a good model, but luckily, or not luckily, but more like this is not a problem that's just that we're the only ones dealing with. There are other groups that have the same problems. So I want to quickly go over what the Gateway API is and how they're struggling with the same issue, or how they're trying to solve the same issue. Let me put it that way. And what we're going to do moving forward with a possible solution. So the Gateway API is very similar to Bucket API, where they need cross namespace access to a particular resource.
Are you sharing anything?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sharing anything? I don't see anything being shared.
Oh, on the screen, I don't have something ready to share actually, unfortunately. Let me see if I can find something.
You can share the Gateway API, right?
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Do you have a link ready, Shing, that I can show?
I have it somewhere. I need to find it too.
Okay. Okay. Hey, one more thing. So I remember last week Mauricio came and he mentioned that it would be good if we took notes. Is there anyone here who could help with that? All right, it's okay. I'll do it. So I'm pulling up the Gateway API. Give me 1 second.
So I added that cross namespace referencing in the chat.
Oh, there it is. Okay, let me share my screen. All right. Yeah, this is their proposal. Yeah, it's possible for them to refer to objects across namespaces. So A gateway
Is
API
this already implemented for the gateway? Oh, but they already have a doc. Is it like they have a cap merge or something? What is
No,
something?
cap is not merged either. So
Oh,
as of,
okay.
as of yesterday, all we decided was what we're going to do about this. Is SIG auth okay with us going and using this across in both gateway API and in bucket API? And what SIG auth said was actually both of us can develop our own implementations of reference policy, which more or less are going to be very similar. And then they can once it's proven out by either of us or both of us, we can go ahead and combine it into one resource type. And one of the things they said was they have had to do this before and it's been done successfully. I don't know what this was in reference to, but they seem confident that even if we develop it separately, we will be able to converge at some point.
So this can also be used for volume snapshot transfer, PVC transfer.
Ben might
Well,
have more to comment on that.
For snapshots, it makes sense to me. For PVCs, I would need to know more. So my
But potentially, should use the same method, right?
yeah. I mean, if we can economize, we absolutely should. My big questions are, first of all, looking at this proposal here, I don't see an actual example of what a reference policy looks like.
Here it is.
I don't see which. Oh, I see. The YAML is a double two things in the same YAML. Okay, so the reference policy has.
It's namespaced.
It's a namespace thing. I guess the name of the reference policy is irrelevant. Or no, wait. Oh no, the HTTP route refers to the reference policy with a rule that matches or for to. Okay, I don't really understand what's going on here, but the important question is like what things get replicated in this scheme and what things don't get replicated in this scheme. So it looks like there's at least two different HTTP route objects. There's only one reference policy object, clearly, but are there one or two service objects in this picture? And
no, so yeah, in Gateway they don't use services; they use HTTP routes.
But in the picture, if you scroll up, like there's these two service objects. Like, what are those?
Oh, okay. So Gateway is so it's like Ingress. Gateway is just a load balancer rule. It's like one line in a load balancer. It's like saying, here's a route. If it matches /bar, send it to this backend. And the thing is, if me as the infrastructure admin would like to specify rules for two different teams, each one in its own namespace, I'll need something like this.
Right, but are you going to end up with HTTP route objects?
Yeah, one
in every
for each
namespace?
Rule. No, one for one for each rule. I'll end up with an HTTP object, and along with that, a reference policy that allows me to refer to that service in that namespace. Yes.
So in the foreign namespace, what do you actually create?
You create a HTTP route pointing to the service in the other namespace.
Just pointing to the service.
Yep.
Not pointing to the HTTP route itself.
No. So you forward to the backend. It could be the HTTP route. I'm still figuring it out, but
I'm just what I want to make sure of here is that like what they're doing is similar enough to what we're doing in terms of like, are they actually taking a cookie cutter and stamping multiple cookies with the cookie cutter, or are they actually sharing one cookie? You know, that there's that neither one is consuming, because like with the snapshot, it makes sense to say, okay, you know, I have a snapshot, you can clone it, I can clone it, Alice can clone it, Bob can clone it. Like we can all clone the snapshot because you're going to end up with a bunch of different volumes that will not be shared. And so if you share the snapshot, nothing can go wrong. If you try to share a PVC, lots of things can go wrong, because if Alice and Bob try to use the same PVC at the same time, you know, you can have all kinds of attachment problems, you know, all the same problems you have when you try to attach multiple pods to a PVC in your namespace. And so it's like you have to think through, is that really what you want? And then similarly, if we extend to buckets, You know,
Go ahead.
are we sharing the bucket? Are we sharing the bucket access? Like, what are we sharing? And just making sure that the thing that gets shared, that there's no downsides to having it be accessible to a bunch of different namespaces in
I
its
thought
raw
we
form.
don't have bucket access object anymore, right? That's something that I
Yep.
thought you're going to flatten that.
Yep.
Yeah.
We
so only
we
be
talked about that last week, but like I think it all depends on what we do here, right? Because we need a
That's
story that
already, I
says,
believe that's already the, if you look at the SIP's latest update on the cap, it says it's flattened out basically.
Yeah.
okay. Sorry,
So-
I haven't seen the latest draft.
Yeah. So actually, if we can use reference policy, I don't see why you even need we don't need a bucket access to be namespace or to be global. And I'm thinking, why do we even need buckets to be global? Assuming that's what we refer to. One reason could be that we want buckets to outlast a namespace. That's fair. But coming back to bucket accesses,
Well, remember that there's two fundamentally different problems. There's the how do I share a bucket between namespaces that was created inside Cozy, and then there's how do I take a bucket from outside Cozy and bring it into Cozy, and then maybe share it.
I mean,
Right.
so we don't have to think of them as two separate mechanisms in the sense. Let's just go with this idea that you either refer to the bucket request in the same namespace, or you refer to a bucket directly in your bucket access request.
Right, but I can't create buckets by myself. Right, if I'm Alice, if I'm Bob, if I'm a namespace user, not an admin, I can't create buckets. I can only create BRs. Right.
True. Yeah.
Okay, so like there's the situation of like I want a new bucket that to be provisioned to me, and so I create a BR to get that to happen. But then there's also that I have an AWS account and I went and created a bucket in AWS, and now I want to use it in Kubernetes. Like in that case, do I create a BR, or does somebody create a B for me?
You just use the BAR to refer to the B. It's no
Right, but
different
who
from
creates the B? And then you're back
admin.
in the
No,
like.
it's no different from static volume provisioning. There's literally no
Okay.
difference. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So static provisioning of brownfield, it's the same situation, right? It's there's one situation where there is no bucket and I want one to be provisioned, and then the other situation is there is
there
already a
somewhere.
bucket and I want to be able to refer to it. And then in both cases, you want to be able to share it
Right.
potentially. And you also want to be able to say no sharing. I want to say this is my bucket. Keep your paws off it, right? You might want to be able to enforce that. And so you just need to have a clear way to achieve each desired outcome.
Yeah. So I see where your question is coming from. You're saying if you're referring to the B anyways, why do we need to have this mechanism to refer to a, like you're not going to refer to a BR in a different namespace.
Right. If in the brownfield case where there is no BR, like you don't need to play this game.
Yeah.
But maybe like I don't know with bucket accesses, a bucket access was originally envisioned to be how you provision new credentials. That's what a BAR or a BA is.
No,
and
hold
then,
on, but we're missing a simple approach here. The simpler approach here is reference policy need not always be to namespace resources. Reference policy can be to clustered resources. So we could set a reference policy that says only BAs from this namespace or matching some parameter can refer to this bucket. That's what you get to say.
yeah,
That's what you want.
perhaps. I mean, I worry that what we're doing is making the very simple case a lot more complicated in order to make the hard case more easy. It's like
So I mean, I would rather just like we have cluster roles and roles, I would rather have it be cluster reference policy and reference policy, something like that. And cluster reference policy just defines who can refer to what bucket.
Yeah.
And it can be a namespace. So like the who can be an entire namespace, because it doesn't make sense to constrain any further. Namespace being the the security domain.
and per bucket you get to set rules. Now you also
But
get to
how do you do things like create credentials now?
no,
Right,
the BA refers to the B, and the controller will go and check if the reference policy allows it to refer, and if it doesn't allow, no credentials get created.
but if I want to create a new credential, what do I do?
Create a new BAR, point it to the bucket.
Create a new BAR, point to the bucket. That will cause a BA to get created that I can use in my namespace. Can anyone else share that BA?
Yeah, in the namespace. You're not sharing the BA itself. You're just allowing a reference to happen from the BAR to the B.
Right, but if Bob created his bucket and his bucket access in this way, and he wants to let Alice access the bucket, does he grant access to the B or the BA?
So okay, so I see what you're saying. So if Bob creates a BR that ends up creating a bucket, and Bob decides that this bucket should only be usable from namespace X, Y, and Z, none of the other namespaces, then Bob creates 3 reference policies having the from B or from B namespaces X, Y, and Z, and to be the actual bucket.
To the
So
bucket. Okay, so once they have bucket, like now they need to go create their own bucket accesses to get their own credentials, right? Okay, and once they do that, even if Bob or the original creator of the bucket revokes the reference policy or changes it such that they can't access it anymore, they already have their own BARs. You can't revoke those, right? Because those are separate standalone objects.
yeah, you can't revoke those, no.
So like by the act of sharing a bucket with
I mean, you
other
could
namespaces.
revoke those. You could revoke those. I mean, the reference policy. So that was a good question that came up during the meeting. One is, how do you deal with reference policy revocation? Because it has to be domain specific. So in case of the bucket reference policy, we'll need the bucket reference policy controller. I'm just giving it a name right here. To go ahead and listen on events, deletion events, and if a particular reference policy is deleted, where a particular reference from a BAR to B is taken out, then we need to go clean up that credential forcefully.
But that's a lot of work. I mean, now we're talking about, I change my reference policy, and namespace objects in someone else's namespace gets deleted as a result of that, right?
But it's not very different from taking out a role for a particular service account that a pod is using. So
but the difference is no objects get deleted in that case. Like all of a sudden you can't do things anymore.
we don't have
Here
to
we're
delete
talking
the
about,
object. We can just revoke access. So it's no different from that. I don't think it's a lot of work per se. I know it's a new way to do this, but I don't think it's a lot of work, right? Like
I don't know. I mean, having written enough controllers, like what you're talking about is fairly because you have to make it all idempotent, right? Like all these, you have to be able to wake up after a crash and know what you were doing and then finish it. And that requires like looking at all kinds of objects and being able to figure out where in the workflow you were when you crashed and finish the job. And the more, like, these like reacting to an event kind of workflows you have, the more state you have to store to be able to recover from a crash. And it multiplies quickly.
I understand multiplies quickly. I'm less worried about the implementation, more about the design itself.
Yeah, it feels more complicated to me. I mean, I'm not saying it's definitely the wrong way to do things, because it certainly has some big upsides. But like, I just want to think through,
fair enough.
what do you do when you want to have a bucket you don't want to share? What do you do when you have a
Don't create
bucket
a
you do
reference
want to
policy.
share? How do you
Don't-
do the static provisioning thing and then share that, and who does it? And then, how do you revoke bearing in mind always that, like, in addition to buckets being physical objects that have a life outside the cluster, credentials are also physical objects that have a life outside the cluster. And so creating them and deleting them has to be carefully managed. And I don't know.
No, I
I,
get that. Yeah, it's not impossible though. I mean, right now, I mean, implementation aside, there are some unanswered questions in the design itself. How about we address them first? Like for
okay.
instance, let's say I create the bucket and I create the BR, which leads to a bucket being created. Now, if I add reference policy in my namespace, let's just say there's no cluster reference policy, but we just have a reference policy. But I'm still trying to figure out what would work. If I just had a reference policy and I said namespace X can refer to my bucket B, um, so if my namespace goes away, then whoever
The
is
bucket goes
using,
away, right?
yeah, depending on retention policy. Yeah, you're right. So it should be fine to revoke access then. Yeah, it goes away.
It's just the question is, what does revoke access mean? Does it mean that you can't create new bucket accesses, or that your existing bucket accesses are pulled out from under you?
Well, it depends on retention policy. That's the answer.
Yeah.
So if the retention policy is deleted, it gets pulled out from under you. If it's retained, then keep it around.
The retention policy is triggered by the deletion of my namespace. But if the bucket is retained, and so my namespace can go away without deletion of the bucket, but the reference policy is in my namespace, it goes away. What about other people that had access to the bucket before my namespace was deleted? Do they continue to have access to the bucket even after the retention policy has been wiped out? I mean, not the retention policy, the reference policy.
Yeah, that's what I'm also thinking about. We could annotate a reference policy, I guess, saying you get this kind of access. This was another question that came up yesterday. How do we take care of that? Is there a generic mechanism to annotate it? It's possible, right? With an annotation or a field, whatever in the reference policy that says, even after this is gone, or it's like ignored during execution, prefer, used during scheduling. It's like that.
Right, but then even if you have some signal that tells the system, leave existing or bucket accesses intact when the namespace goes away, you still can't create new ones. You still don't know what to do with all the existing objects when they get deleted, right? You just have a bunch of stuff flying around that you can use to access the bucket. But if you ever want to get that bucket back into usable shape, you're going to have to do some serious work.
But that problem always existed with the namespace going away. So the one problem of what can we do if the bucket reference policy goes away, the answer was what I just said. That would work, where you have some sort of reference or some sort of parameter on the reference policy that says, let this reference stick around even if during the execution, just don't allow new references to happen. So that would fix
I guess I'm getting tripped up on what is the difference between access to a bucket and access to, or the ability to reference a bucket versus the ability to reference a bucket access.
There's no ability to reference a bucket access, right? It's always reference to a bucket. It's
always reference to a bucket. Okay, so and remind me again that you said we're getting rid of BARs and just making it bucket accesses and their namespace.
We're getting rid of BA and we're using just BARs where the BA information itself is stored in the status. That's all.
Okay. So there are no BAs, just BAR. So if I can reference a bucket, that means I can create a BAR. And then when the reference policy goes away, my BAR might just continue to function.
Yeah.
But I won't be able to create new ones.
Yep.
If the reference policy doesn't say I can. So, and then if the person who originally created the bucket wants to also revoke my access, can they do that, or is that not possible?
No, it's not possible. Well, if it depends on how we gave the reference policy initially. But I don't think that should be possible in general.
Okay, so yeah, once I create a reference policy, I have to assume that the people in that reference policy can create accesses that there's nothing I can do about.
Mhm.
So you're sort of really handing them the keys to the kingdom at that point, and you
Well,
can't, for
it's no
example,
different. Mhm. It's no different from them just copying the data. It's like and holding on to it. So I don't see. Yeah, they maybe they can't delete it any further, but
well,
you know,
they can overwrite the data in the bucket if they have write access, and I can't stop them.
no, that's true. Yes, but that bad actor thing is why you trust the namespace. That's why you allow this namespace to use
But,
this.
right, but what if my intent is like, what if Alice wants to give Bob read-only access to her bucket?
That's the annotation. So we need some mechanism. We're still figuring out. This is all open questions. So how do
Okay.
we say this is the kind of reference that's possible? So like access control, like that. And I think our reference policy, our bucket reference policy, is going to be a little different from this gateway reference policy, which is more bare bones. We're going to have one something saying whether when this reference policy goes away, should existing references be cleaned up or not. Number two is what kind of access are we allowing.
Yeah, and I don't know how you express what kind of access you're allowing, because there could be a whole bunch of BACs in the system, and any one of them could have different types of access. So like, I don't know how fine. I mean, you could potentially end up replicating the whole BAC system inside this
Okay, hold
reference
on. So
policy.
why do we even need to model it though? Why not just say, we our reference policy does not go to that level of granularity. All it says is you can refer to this bucket. How you
Right.
use it is really up to your namespace.
Right, but if there is if a BAC exists that grants write access, and I only want to give you read access.
You can't do that. That level of granularity is not allowed. That's
Okay, yeah. So but that seems less good than having control. I mean, I keep coming back to the the design that I was preferring was the one where when you want to share the bucket, you actually create the BAR in your own namespace, and then you share that with someone so that you have complete control over which BAC gets used in the creation of that BAR.
I think it's I don't think it's a good. I don't think it's going to end up anywhere if we try to do this thing where we revoke access when we feel like it, because
I'm not talking about revoke. I'm saying like if I only want to give you read-only access, like what I can do is I can create a BAR and refer to the read-only
no, the way
BAC.
to do it is you have a cluster reference policy that says from this namespace you can only refer to these BCs. Um,
BACs.
or BACs, yeah.
Okay, but then if a new BAC gets created, then you can't. Nothing's going to work, right? So if there was a list of allowed BACs in the reference policy, that would at least address my concern. But again, it feels like more complexity.
Yeah, that seems too complex. That I agree with you. Yeah, but there is a simpler design here. So I just feel like reference policy by itself, the concept is a powerful concept. Now, if we just need to make some tweaks to the concept in order to get what we want, that's fine. Like from what I see here, I think we need to improve reference policy to have the ability to do these things that we just talked about. One is, I'm not even sure at this point whether we need to restrict the kind of access. I think that can be done as a second step even. Um, I think first step can just be you can refer to this. I trust you as an entire namespace. Or we could go a step further and say only one BAR can refer to this. Um, if we have reference policy at that level of granularity, then what we can do is we can have a reference policy, another one for uh, a BAR and a BC. So we'll say this BAR can only refer to this BAC, sorry. And we get then and then we select the same BAR for the reference to the B as well. So that way we end up in a situation where um, that BAR can only use that BC.
Okay, did anyone else follow that? I was trying to
Okay,
kind
so
of follow.
let me no, sorry, I was just I was thinking it through. Let
Yeah.
me cleanly explain it. So simple thing is, if you were to set the reference policy at the granularity of a single resource, then you can restrict what BAC it can access, and you can also refer. You can also restrict what B it can refer to. That way, you can cleanly restrict what kind of access it can get for a particular bucket.
So I would create one reference policy that would say this BAR and this BAC.
Mhm.
And then if I had a different BAR and the same BAC, I'd create another reference policy for that other. Wait, no, it's not the BAR. It's just the B you said. Because
Yeah.
I'm not sharing the BARs.
Yeah.
You're just sharing the
Two
Bs.
reference policy. Yeah, two reference policies. One from a particular BAR to a particular B, another from the same BAR to a particular BAC. And
But you said the BARs are never shared across namespaces.
no,
So
the
why would they need
BAR.
reference policies?
So the reference policy is not on the BAR. It's from the bucket. It's for the bucket and for the
Right. So
BAC. Yeah.
but at the time I create the reference policy, there are no BARs yet. And the idea is I create it and then the other person will create a BAR
By the
and then
name.
something will check whether that BAR can bind based on the reference policy, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
If you want to
I don't know. I mean, it can work. I'm not seeing any deadly flaws. It's just it's a different way of doing things. So I'll have to get comfortable with it.
Mhm. So you get both of the things that you asked for. One is controlling who gets access and what kind of access they get. Both can be taken care of by reference policy. That's why this is a clean abstraction. I mean, at least so far.
Well, I mean, yeah, just trying to think through the things that make it muddy are that these reference policies are always namespaced.
Yeah, it does make it muddy. So
And like if you have the static provisioning case, like whose namespace do you put the reference policy in?
right.
And
Should it always be namespaced? Mhm.
and furthermore, like if someone is just pointing to a bucket from their BR or from their BAR in some namespace, how do you even know where to look for the reference policy? Because is there a back pointer from the bucket to say, I am controlled by reference policy in namespace foo? Or do you have to search through all the namespaces?
I mean,
Like,
you have a back pointer to the BR.
right, but in the static provisioning case, you don't, right? It's just, there's just a B.
How is cluster role done today?
Cluster roles are only referred to by cluster role bindings. And cluster role bindings are referred to by they bind the service account. So they point to the service account. And so I guess the thing that enforces them just knows about all of the cluster role bindings.
To service accounts. Yeah, something
It just
like
has to
that.
have a comprehensive notion of every cluster role binding in the whole system.
Mhm.
So that every time a service account wants to do something, it can quickly look up,
Mhm.
can I do it? Or can that principal do it?
Mhm.
Here we have a situation of, random user creates a BAR and points to a B, and now we're trying to decide, can it bind or not? And the controller has to figure out where do I go look for reference policies that might relate to that bucket.
Yeah.
And the answer is you have to look in every namespace at every reference policy, potentially. There's no fast lookup.
We don't need fast lookup, it's just bucket provision.
It's access provisioning.
Oh, sorry, access provisioning, yeah. It's not performance critical. It would be good to have it fast. That being said, let's explore cluster reference policy.
I mean, I guess the other concern is like, what if there's multiple? Like, nothing stops two different users and two different namespaces from creating bucket or reference policies that point to the same bucket. And then how do you know which one is authoritative?
What happens today with services, I guess it's similar to that. Like you can refer to selectors. Selectors can refer to a whole bunch of pods.
But services never refer to anything outside their own namespace, right?
I mean, the question is really, how do you deal with a reference or multiple references to or multiple rules for the same thing? Like what if I did that with, say, service accounts and cluster roles? What do I do then?
Service accounts and cluster roles. Well, I mean, every cluster role binding has a unique name, and they all stack with each other, right? So if I have two cluster roles,
but they point to a particular service account, or they point to a
right,
particular namespace. So what if I have 3 cluster roles pointing to the same namespace and the same
you get all, I mean, they all three stack up with each other. You can have a service account with a bajillion cluster role bindings and role bindings because they just all, it's additive, right? So it's actually valid to have two different ones that both apply.
So it only becomes, so in our case, then same thing. You have the bucket reference policy. If you have multiple bucket reference policies to different namespaces, it's okay, it's good.
But it isn't, because so with cluster role bindings, the only one who can create them is the administrator. So if one exists, you know that it wasn't an evil person that created one. Here it's a namespace object. So now if Charlie wants to gain access to Alice's bucket, he can create his own reference policy that gives himself access in his own namespace, and we won't know that that was an evil thing to do, right? He can just create the reference policy in his own namespace, point it at the bucket, say, oh, I have access. Isn't that nice?
No, that's not what I'm saying. So that would not work for anyone. So the reference policy for the bucket should only be possible for someone to create for a bucket if they created it, or if that namespace created it. I don't know how to make it happen. Huh?
Yeah, how do you know who created it?
I'm just talking about what it should be. Let's figure out how to do it. That's the second step.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, hey, somewhere you need a pointer. Like, I feel like you need a back pointer on the bucket that says the namespace that it came from, so that you can use that back pointer to decide if there are multiple reference policies, which one do I read?
I don't think that's enough, though. No, you have a BR, back pointer to the BR, so you find that way. But what I don't, that's not enough, though. So you have a back pointer from the bucket to the BR, okay, and using that you can tell which namespace it came from. So you could say,
all right, so that at least filters out all the other namespaces.
What?
Sorry. Okay, right. Okay, and then you can have multiple reference policies that stack with each other inside one namespace. That's all fine. Okay. So then my only question is, in the static provisioning case where you just create the B and there is no BR, is there no back pointer and thus no way to resolve this problem? Or do we force you to put a BR in some namespace so that it combined, so that we know where to find the reference policies for that B?
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, we could do the forcing thing, but how would that look?
It would just be that no one could use the B until it was bound, right? An unbound B would be unusable because we wouldn't know how to find what namespace to look for reference policies to perform our access checks. So we could just say, you know what, nothing happens until it binds. And when you do the static provisioning thing, you have to also create a BR somewhere and allow it to bind before those access checks can proceed.
It's not very different from PVCs and PVs, where PV is created manually, right? The binding logic is terrible. Like the whole thing about binding is what got us in a lot of trouble with PVs and PVCs.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's how I'm used to thinking about this stuff because I've been doing PVs and PVCs for a couple of years at this point.
What would you say with all this experience? Would you say it's okay to go down this route? Like, is that something that we should avoid no matter what because of whatever you've seen through the years? Or is that okay? Like, we know the trade-offs. This is okay. We can just do it and we should be able to deal with it, even though it's terrible design.
I don't want to stand in the way of progress. I guess what I will say is that, you know, the original design that involved everything being bound and required like very complicated transfers of objects across namespaces to achieve the various sharing scenarios. I know that that would work because I've written
Wait,
it
what
before.
is this transfer thing? Oh, you're talking about the export import thing?
When we were talking about, yeah, like creating BARs and transferring them across namespaces and using that mechanism to achieve the sharing use case, like I know that would work because I've done it. So like I'm familiar with it. I know that internally it doesn't pollute the logic of the base controllers because the base controllers can assume that everything has one-to-one binding and you never have to go across namespaces, and like lots of things are very simple in the base controllers, and it pushes all the complexity into the situation when you actually want to move something across a namespace. So this scheme starts off with the assumption that you can
I
go
mean,
across namespaces, and
moving across namespaces inherently is imperative, right?
I don't know. I mean, for a long time it hasn't been done in Kubernetes with PVCs and snapshots. Like up until now, your PVCs and your snapshots have been stuck in the namespace they were created in, unless an admin comes and does something magical. And people have lived with that for years.
Yeah, it's not declarative, right? That's the issue, I think.
What's not declarative?
Trying to move things across namespaces.
Well, it requires tweaking non-namespaced objects, but the rest of it, to change the policy is really the thing, or to force an unbind.
I think that's
I don't know.
So the other thing is we need to have the way we do this cross namespace resource sharing should be consistent with how everyone else is going to face the same or solve the same problem.
Yeah. So I do want to think about it through that lens too. It's like assuming that this approach catches on and the network guys are using it and we're using it with object storage, maybe the snapshots can use something like this, and we should think about it through that lens too. And I'd have to sort of sit back and think about all the problems in that context. But can I ask, you said you got a lot of Tim's attention last week on the KEP. Was he pushing us in this direction? Is this his preferred approach?
Yep.
Okay. So if Tim is involved in the design of the router thing, through the HTTP route thing, and he feels like it's going to work, and he also thinks it's going to work for Cozy, like that gives me a lot of hope because he knows, I think, way more than any of us about Kubernetes APIs and the potential pitfalls.
I mean, I don't know about that. I just because Tim feels that way, I don't think it's given. But just reasoning about this, it seems like there is no. I mean, there are pitfalls, obviously, but it seems like the abstraction is powerful enough that we can come up with clean ways to solve any of the use cases that we have. So far, it's been the cleanest approach. Unless when you said the export import thing was better, I'm still trying to reason about why it was better. Like, one, it seems imperative to me just on first thought, but is it not?
Well, it means that you could write all of your controllers the first time around without having to worry about, checking policies and things. They can just deal with the individual objects that they need to deal with. Each controller can be very modular, and you never need to worry about these chains of events, right? Like the controller that sees BRs and creates Bs is a very simple job. It just looks for BRs, checks if they're bound, and if they're not, it creates a B and then it binds them, and it's done. And like that controller can be a couple hundred lines of code, and it's code complete. And then you have another sidecar that sees Bs and then calls into the Cozy driver and causes a bucket to get created, and then takes the result of that and sticks it back on the status of the B, and that's done, and that's self-contained and doesn't have to worry about anything else. And like you can have a bunch of these tiny little modules that have very small jobs when everything is bound one-to-one, and you never have a situation where you're looking at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 objects to decide whether something is doable. I feel like once you add a reference policy and it's able to point to BCs, and then you have a situation where someone creates a BAR, you're looking at that BAR, you're looking at the B that it refers to, you're looking at the BR that the B refers to, you're looking at the BC, or then you're looking at the reference policy. You're like, quickly you have 5 or 6 objects you're looking at, maybe even 7, if you're like scoping which BCs can be referred to, just to make the decision of like, can I bind this or not?
So I mean, that's the case with even pod scheduling. You know, you look at a lot of different things to see if you can just run the pod somewhere. I see the complexity of bringing up. But if you were to make these modular, instead of looking at it as you know, another step in the same workflow of can you know, provisioning a bucket or provisioning a bucket access. Think of it as 2 separate modules. One is just checking if you're allowed to do it. Another is the provisioning modules. It's completely separate. They interact at some point, but while designing them, you do it separately. While writing the code for it, you do it separately. And only in that point of convergence where you refer to a B from a BAR, this has to be taken into account, or BAC from a BAR, whatever. So
you need to refer to both, right? The BAR needs both a
Mhm.
class and a bucket to refer to.
Right.
Yeah.
But the additional complexity is just, you know, on top of what we already had is only the checking.
Maybe I guess I've seen so many bugs pop up related to, you know, complex interactions between objects that it feels like it's easier to reason about. There's only ever 1 or 2 or 3 objects, you know, in scope for any given decision. It's much easier to think about all of the strange things that could occur, right? All of the race conditions, all of the strange corner cases. It's just easier to reason about them when there's less involved in any one code path. And it feels like this is creating a situation you unavoidably will have a large number of objects involved in the mere decision of can it bind or not. And maybe it's fine. Like maybe the user, maybe the code is a little more nasty and the user experience is way better. Like I haven't convinced myself of that yet, but maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Just as a person that like writes controllers, I like brain dead simplicity.
No, me too. Any piece of software, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I mean, the only way to achieve that is through abstractions, Ben. It's not possible to do it any other way. If you get, you know.
Yeah. No, let's keep going with this idea. I think if Tim is behind it, it does seem to solve a lot of problems. And the best case would be if we shared the actual implementation effort with other groups so that this became a thing that everyone was contributing to.
Yeah.
Then it's good for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna keep in touch with the SIG auth meetings and make sure that you know, that way even gateway group is aware of how we're doing it versus how they're doing it, and we can converge cleanly.
So Sid,
Go ahead,
and I
JP.
have one question. Like, it's maybe I didn't like follow up in the beginning. So do we mandatory need to have a reference policy for B? Like, can we be without reference policy as well? Like for the simple scenarios or for the simple cases?
Yeah. So I think Ben was mentioning that. So in that simple case, would it mean that the question is, if there is no reference policy, does it mean that everyone can access it, or does it mean that no one can access it? Depending on the answer to that question, I think it's either simple or hard. So for instance, if we say there's no reference policy, nobody in other namespace can access this bucket. Great. So that's a very simple way to do it.
Okay. So like if you start from the beginning or from the easy way to implement, I think if there's no reference policy, like anyone can access it. Like a reference policy might add more security or like more constraints for that bucket. So that's my thought.
I see. Yeah. So we could say if there's no reference policy on a bucket, then nobody can access that bucket outside the namespace in which it was created.
Yeah, that's something like that.
That seems reasonable to me. We don't have to have this free for all mode at all. since cross namespace inherently is like crossing a security domain, so I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess that's good. Like that's my opinion. Like,
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm glad. So, I mean, I'm still not sure of what we decided on, what are we going to decide on. But what I'll do is I'll come up with a bunch of slides like I used to do way back, to come up with like different possibilities of how this reference policy itself will look. And let's make a decision on how we're going to converge on, like what we're going to call, like what it's going to look like finally. Because it seems like as of right now, we're not sure between regular reference policy and cluster reference policy. We're not sure of how it's going to look for static buckets versus buckets created in a namespace. We have some answers to some questions in silos, basically, like, but converging all of this is still unclear to me.
Sid, is this going to be a completely open API, like the from and to? Are those like open? You can define any API group kind.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
there's going to
That
be
may be tricky. Okay.
a generic reference policy. We could start out with something like a bucket reference policy and then use that to create the final Kubernetes level API. But so the last meeting with SIG, this is what we decided. We decided that both Cozy and Gateway API will be the test beds for doing something like this. We can come up with approaches separately, and based on these two, we're going to come up with something for Kubernetes in general. So we have a lot of freedom to build it our way to satisfy our needs, and I would rather build it specifically for like buckets, and then they can extrapolate it and create something generic for Kubernetes, and we can piggyback on it when it's ready. So initially, I think we should just do it for buckets or specific to bucket objects.
Yeah, because otherwise it's hard if it's a completely open.
Right.
Don't know what problems we'll run into.
Yeah. All right. All right. So I'm gonna write that down and bring it up to everyone next meeting, and let's figure this out. Let's flush this out. In the meantime, I'm just gonna tell Tim that, hey, we've gone down this path of reference policy, and for alpha, our stance is it's gonna be free for all. Anyone can refer to a bucket created outside in a different namespace or statically. That's our alpha way, and I think we should be good to go. He said he was fine with that. He just wanted us to just make sure we make the decision after we understood reference policy. Did you say something, man?
I said that sounds good. Let's see how it looks.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. Okay, we're out of time almost. Any other questions or any other thoughts? All right. I'll go and update the document with some of the notes with whatever we talked about. I didn't get a chance to take them down as we spoke, but I should be able to fill that in. It'll help others also, other members who join this group, to know what's going on. Yeah, and for us also to search for anything we discussed previously. Yeah, that's about it. Let's talk next week, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.